Well, welcome. Here we are in the woods for the second edition of BlueTube Live for this year in lockdown. And things are a little bit different. You might notice that we're a different way up. I can't go that way. No, doesn't let me do that. Probably shouldn't have done that. And also I have a special guest here at a social distance, and here he is.
Hello there, I'm Tony Whitbread, yes, at a social distance, and I'm actually in the woods this time, which is great, because last time I was sitting in my office being very jealous about Jane out here in the woods.
And I'm really glad to have him, because it will mean that your questions will get answered much more efficiently than I can do, and also we'll find out even more about what we're looking at. So, Tony, could you just give us a start by explaining where we are, what sort of wood this is?
Yeah, certainly. This is one of our local woods, and we're in the Weald of Sussex, and actually the species mixture we get here really, to me, they shout Weald of Sussex at me. It's all about wet clay soils. We're not on the downs, so there's not very much lime in the soils, so it's a fairly clayey soil, mixture of clay and sandstone, and it gives a particular sort of habitat that we see all over Sussex, because this is really a chestnut wood and it's coppiced on a regular basis, etc, etc, so it's a nice rich woodland, but most of the trees are actually chestnut, and they're not native. They were introduced probably quite a long time ago. Some people say the Roman period, but I think most of these here probably date from a couple of hundred years ago. So this wood was probably changed quite considerably a couple of hundred years ago when the chestnut was introduced, and now it's one of our more commercial species. You know, it's worth growing as a chestnut coppice, but it's almost like an honorary native. It grows just over in the continent anyway. It seems to form a nice habitat, as we can see from the ground flora. It's probably just as nice as some of the other more native trees as well. And the other interesting thing about, I think this is true, chestnut, sweet chestnut, its Latin name is Castanea sativa. And I think, I'm not sure which gives the name to which, but I think that's where the name castanets comes from. I think that's what castanets were made of, sweet chestnut. Or is it the other way around? I can't remember, I don't know, but the names are linked there somewhere.
Ah. Now, welcome to Anne King, who's just joined us.
Oh,
nice
hello,
to
Anne.
see you, Anne.
Yeah.
And we are back in the woods. We're trying not to move as much because we had a few issues last time with the signal. So, Tony, if these chestnut trees are 200 odd years old, some of them, obviously not all of them, why is this an ancient wood?
Yeah, the ancientness doesn't relate to the age of the trees. An ancient wood is something that's been in existence for at least 400 years, probably a lot longer, but the maps came out 400 years ago. So a lot of our ancient woods probably date back to the Ice Age, but it's the site, not the trees. In fact, the oldest thing on here probably is these coppice stalls, which can be really quite old. The trees are actually younger, so the big old trees in between are actually younger than the coppice stalls. But it's always been managed, you know, for hundreds of years. This place has been managed. It's a resource. It was the energy store, or the energy resource for a lot of what happened in the medieval period, for example. So in the past, these trees would have been cut for all sorts of purposes, mainly for fuel, perhaps. These days for posts and stakes and so on. And in parts of, particularly the Sussex Weald, the coppice was cut to make charcoal to fire the iron industry. So this was the birthplace of industry, really. Wow.
Now, is there anything of note that you want to show us on the ground?
Yeah, let's have a look at a couple of things. There's buckler fern, which you get in this sort of woodland, so it's more finely divided than male fern, which is similar. What else have we got here? So a little bit of ground ivy, only a small bit. That when you crush the leaves, that smells horrible. In fact, you can sometimes tell that when you're simply walking through the woods, because it's a horrible smell.
Now we're looking at particularly muddy bits. Shall we try the other bank?
Yeah, see what else is here.
Looks a bit more
buckler fern. Yeah, more buckler fern. There's bluebells, which are growing vigorously now, and some of them are pushing through the leaves. Got a nice mossy bank here. Yeah. So.
And with the bluebells, why are there so many in some woods and not in others?
Yeah, well, bluebells are they're slow to colonise, so where you find them, there's probably an ancient woodland. They colonise better in Sussex than most of the rest of the country, but when you get these carpets of bluebells, that's an indicator of an ancient wood. However, there's the other thing about bluebells, is they're really encouraged by the coppice cycle, because every now and then these plants, they come out early in the year to get to the light before the trees come out. But every now and then they really benefit from the canopy opening up entirely. So I think you could call it a management artifact. You know, it's a link between human management and natural history. Where you get these carpets of bluebells is probably because of centuries of coppicing opening up the canopy, they get resources. When the canopy closes, they can flower. Then it happens again 20, 30 years later. It's the same, even more so, with the daffodils. They do well. They come out early in the year before the trees do, but even so, they benefit from having their canopy opened up every 10, 20 years. So it's probably really linked. The reason we got this lovely displays of daffodils is probably really linked to the long-term management history of this site.
And welcome to George Gold. Lovely to see you on board for this little Facebook Live. I hope you're enjoying it. Do let us know if there's anything you particularly want us to be looking at, but I can guarantee you that Tony will find you things that I don't know exist. So he's quickly thinking, how do I rise to this challenge?
What can I find now?
What can I find now?
There's yellow archangel just coming out here.
So what's yellow archangel?
Well, that looks like a yellow dead nettle when it grows up. So yeah, I think this is all yellow archangel. It's actually quite difficult to tell when it's this small. You've got loads of honeysuckle, which spreads along the ground. We often don't even realise it's here, but if you look at the trees, you see honeysuckle growing into the trees. And that's a food plant of several butterflies. Woodland butterflies like the white admiral and even purple emperor. Actually, no, I think the purple emperor likes the sallows. It's the white admiral.
We did see a bee earlier before we started going live, didn't we? And it was burrowing in this sort of mossy area.
Yeah, I think what we saw, I'm not sure exactly the species, but it was probably a buff-tailed bumblebee, and it was a huge queen, because that's what you see this time of year. The big things are looking for somewhere to start a nest. So that's what we saw a little bit earlier.
Good morning to George, who's just said good morning to us as well. Now, we did want to take you down at the bottom because there's a bit of a quagmire, but we ran out of signal there, so we're not going to risk it just yet. We might give you a little treat afterwards on that.
Look what I found here.
But look what Tony's found. He's excited.
This looks like clover, but actually it's wood sorrel, which has a little white flower later in the year. And actually this leaf is edible. It tastes like apple peel, I suppose, and that's probably why it's got the sorrel name. It tastes a bit like sorrel. So it looks a bit muddy, so I'm not going to eat it. But this is edible. That's another ancient woodland plant, grows in the kind of humus layer on the surface. And there's another one here. This is Pignut, which is actually in the carrot family. You see the leaf is a little bit like a carrot.
Oh, yeah.
And I've got this theory. You know the poem Here We Go, it's got the line, here we go gathering nuts in May. Well, there aren't any nuts in May, are there? And this is ground nut. So if you dig down there is a little nut at the end of it, and people used to eat it. So I wonder if the ground nut or the pig nut relates to that. Incidentally, I wouldn't eat anything from this family because it includes some very poisonous plants, so I wouldn't chance it. If you see something looking vaguely like that, leave it alone.
Well, that's a good warning to us, isn't it? Do you know what? I would walk past this a million times and not even see it without you showing us, so that's good. So we've got sorrel, and we've got, I've forgotten the name of it already.
Pignut.
Pignut. How could I forget that? It's so obvious, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it is when you've been told. There's all sorts going on in this muddy area, isn't there?
Yeah. It's just gradually things come out at this time of year. You can gradually, every week it's slightly different. Yeah. So you see things gradually bursting through the layers. I mean, all these fronds of ferns, they're last year's. So they've stayed green all through the winter, but they'll be new growth.
Is that usual for them to stay green that time?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Some of them stay more green than others, but this is buckler fern, nice woodland fern.
We haven't heard many birds, have we?
They've gone a bit quiet on us at the moment.
Let's have a listen. See if we can bring you any bird noise. No. Right, what have we got here?
Something else really
exciting.
tiny. I mean, this is tiny at best of times, but especially at the beginning of the year.
Okay.
This is a little plant called Moschatel. Now, it hasn't got any flowering spikes on it. One of its local names is Townhall clock, because it has a very small flowering spike, and then it's got a flower on 4 sides. But each side looks like the face of a clock, but it's tiny, 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 a couple of millimetres or so. It doesn't quite look like a Townhall clock because there's also a clock on the very top as well, but you get the idea. 4-sided plant with the face of a clock on each side. And that's Moschatel.
So we'll come back. We're coming back to the woods for the next couple of weeks or so and see whether that grows anymore, whether we can find it or not. I don't know. Now, we've had a question from Chris Besant. Is on Pignut Woodland Species.
Sorry, which one?
Pignut. Is that the pignut that we were talking about?
That was Pignut.
Yes. Is it a woodland species?
Yes, it's an ancient woodland species. You do get it in ancient meadows to some extent, usually when they're around the edge of a woodland. I've certainly seen them spreading into meadows, but it tends to again indicate ancient habitats. And a lot of the things we're seeing here are here because they're, they take a long time to colonise, and when they do, they stay put. So a lot of these things really do indicate ancientness. That's something that's colonised fairly well. We've got honeysuckle here, which comes in, and people know about that.
Fantastic. Well, we wanted to go further down into the damp area, didn't we? We didn't get the signal right, but some of the smaller plants that you've just been showing us, are those the sorts of things that we would find further?
Yes.
What's this?
Oh, I think that's wood forget-me-not.
Oh.
Yeah.
We better not forget that then, had we?
I'll try not to forget that one, yeah.
I mean, obviously it's much easier to know all of this when the flowers start coming out.
When they're 2 or 3 times the size, it does give us a bit more chance, but yeah. And this is the classic mixture of this sort of woodland. You go to a lot of woods in Sussex. This is a really good example. You go to a lot of woods in Sussex and you'll get this mixture. And it all indicates clay soils with not much lime in them. If you go on the South Downs, where it's very chalky and lime rich, you'll get something very different. Including some of these species, but others as well.
What do you think of being in a wood like this?
Oh, it's great. It's my natural habitat. Can't you tell as I wander around effervescing about everything I'm seeing? But no, it's a really nice, and it's always changing. I mean, spring's a lovely time because you can see the plants coming out. Even the middle of winter. You come here in the middle of winter, all the plants have died down, so you can see the landform. If you see the landform, it means you can read the history, because you can see where the banks and ditches are. You can see where maybe old coppice hearths were in the past. Maybe, if you're lucky, even old saw pits where people used to cut up things in the woods from years ago. So there's these layers of history written into woods that you can really start to read at different times of year.
And actually, Clarissa's just asked a question about this. She said, can you explain about the coppicing?
Yeah.
What percentage of the stems are removed, and is it the larger or the smaller stems?
Right, well, what they do is they cut all the stems. A good active coppice, let's have a look at this one. A good active coppice, in fact this has been cut because it's on the side of a track, but in a coppice woodland, what would happen is the whole thing would be cut and that all would be used as a resource. So the coppice stalls would be cut on something like a 20-year rotation. But if you look, can't see any here, but there's some big trees mixed in as well, and they're the timber trees or the standard trees. See, I can't see any now. Oh, this one right next to us here.
Okay.
Now that's a future standard tree, so that would be cut on a much longer rotation of about 100 years for timber rather than coppice products. So with coppice, they'd be cut completely on something like a 20-year rotation, depending on what they're used for, and it invigorates the stall. Often trees last longer when they're coppiced than when they're just left to grow normally, which is amazing. Ash trees, for example, there are records of ash coppices living for 1,000 years, whereas an individual tree probably lives half that time.
Well, that's going to be interesting because next week we're going to take it ourselves a bit further up the track, and they've actually coppiced a huge amount, and we're going to look at that and try not to be worried by it based on what you've just been talking to us about. But I think we'll probably be calling it a day for today for those patient people who came back 3 times, not just twice but 3 times, and we'll leave the teaser of what we will be seeing next week. So Tony, I think you better say hello to your mum again.
Yes. Hello Mum, hope you've seen this. I don't know whether you've managed to stick with us all this time, but happy Mother's Day.
Oh, isn't he a good son? To everybody who's enjoying Mother's Day, I hope you get some time out and get to enjoy the woods where you are. Thanks for joining us. See you soon.